Over the last few days, China has showed off its rapidly advancing military technology. It's unveiled a series of cutting-edge military hardware, a sixth-generation fighter aircraft, a 40,000-ton amphibious assault ship that's nearly the size of India's aircraft carriers. China also unveiled a massive mothership which can carry 16 tons, drones and smaller other weapons. It's also unveiled a 500-ton stealth drone ship which can carry drones as well. These are developments of great concern to India. The Indian Air Force is yet to induct even a fifth-generation fighter aircraft. The PLA is already twice the size of the Indian Navy. In fact, it inducts one entire Indian Navy every 6 years. China is, of course, building up an arsenal to take on the United States. But this has consequences for India as well, which shares a 3,000-kilometer contested boundary with the People's Republic. There is a growing technology differential developing between India and China. How worried should we be? And what do we need to do? Joining me to discuss this today are three very distinguished members of India's defense community. Mr. Vijay Parel, Lieutenant General P. Ravi Shankar, and Air Marshal Diptendu Chaudhary. Gentlemen, welcome to the News9 Plus show. Mr. Patil, I want to start by asking you this. China has just demonstrated a sixth-generation fighter aircraft, escorted by a fifth-generation fighter aircraft. We are still in the planning process for a fifth-generation fighter aircraft. What do you make of all of the speed of technology that Beijing is showcasing in the last couple of days? What do we make of it? How worried should we be?
Truly, we should be really worried because, to my mind, the amount of dependence that India has created on, very limited amount of its own organizations, which it continues to depend on. And this is where one of those root causes of why things don't happen in India. Second, obviously, is the alacrity at which the acquisition needs to be happening.
Yes.
We somehow believe that the entire Indian industry is someone who can wait and wait and wait. Obviously, when it comes to government deals, they happen at quite an alacrity.
Yes.
So some of these basics need to get corrected. The related and most important point is how much we actually are prepared to commit out of our own budget.
Yes.
For defense. Because today we see that the social spending, and of course what even the state governments have now learned to spend more and more. After the GST regime, how come the states are not responsible for creation of capability at the national level? It's not only center's game, because the taxes, duties, if they are shared almost equally, rather the major share goes to the states. How come the states are not able to pay or should be willing to pay for the national defense? And that's essentially a way one can actually enhance the amount of budget which is available for defense preparedness. When we have an enemy which is not very friendly, we need to be putting our act into.
Yes, absolutely. We need to get our act together. A number of issues you've highlighted there, Mr. Patil. The first issue, of course, is that differential in the fighter aircraft, the fifth generation and the sixth generation aircraft that the Chinese flew simultaneously, literally cocking a snook at us, if you could say that. Air Marshal Chaudhary, we are yet to get even a fifth generation fighter aircraft. Beijing seems to have stolen a march over us. How worried should we be? And this larger issue of what Mr. Patil said, that the full weight of developing these technologies seem to rest on very few organizations. That's going to be part two of my question to you. Should only one HAL or one GTRE be entrusted with these projects, or is there a need for a larger defense architecture to handle these national projects?
This is something which I've mentioned in the past. I've been writing on for the last 2 to 3 years, in fact, is that we are a nation which is, unfortunately, we are air power blind.
Yes.
Air power blindness has isolated the aerial domain from the continental and the maritime ones. There are, aside from service-centric interests, this is one nation we must remember. The air power has always been constrained in its military offensive use in all our wars except 1971. 1971 was 50 years ago. And the last significant conflict we had was also 25 years ago in Kargil. So I'm afraid we have lost the notion of what air power really brings to the table of national security. I'm afraid. I'm being blunt and serious on this. This is a fact that has led to a series of problems of what the Indian Air Force faces today. Most certainly, if you look at the way air power is being leveraged in the world across, and especially a classic example is what way the Israel does. I'm not quoting that we should be like that, but the fact of it is that if we seek to be a power of consequence in the years to come, I'm afraid China will come in our way, and air power will play a significant role in this. And unless and until we realize that this only major asymmetric deterrence, conventional, which we have against China right now, presently, is with air power, offensive air power. A differential or an asymmetric deterrence which is rapidly shrinking, and very soon, it's going to be out of our reach at some point, because we have already seen the gap incredibly. We have seen it happening in front of our eyes, this gap build up to a point of fourth generation platforms. We are struggling with 4.5 generation platforms.
Yes.
And fifth generation is nowhere in sight for the next at least a decade plus. Our future plans, in spite of all our push towards Atmanirbharta, are held ransom to international access to international technologies, and especially in the case of a fighter, to the aircraft fighter engines. So it's a creation of our own making, I'm afraid.
It's a creation of our own making. General Ravi Shankar, this is an issue that we've discussed several times in the past, that when it comes to high technology, defense technology, we somehow seem to lack either the willpower or the ability to get our act together when it comes to this. And now, as our panelists are saying, that gap seems to be widening between India and China with every passing year. And you just saw the slew of projects that they have unveiled. Not all of them are going to be inducted almost immediately, but that gives you a direction of where warfare is headed and where the Chinese are heavily investing. What is it that we should do right now to make up for this differential?
Look, the first thing I think we need to understand is that future warfare is going to be totalitarian in nature, right? It's no more that hybrid war and things like that. You need total capabilities.
Right.
There are a lot of people who are talking of total war has returned. When you start thinking of that kind of war and not cater for, Pakistan kind of a threat,
Yes.
or the CI kind of a threat, then you have to look at your defense capability enhancement differently.
Right.
Are we doing that at the macro level? We are not. In fact, the current government over the past 1 decade has actually reduced your defense budget. That's the first thing. So your defense budgets are reducing. Unless you put more on the table, you'll get nothing. At this point of time, your defense budget is just enough to keep the territorial integrity and sovereignty of the nation intact. If you think with this kind of budgeting that you'll become a power to be reckoned with,
Right.
I think we are off the track. The second thing is our lack of technology consciousness. Most of the platforms which we are contracting today, their whole story started a decade back. And the technologies which we are going to get are also a decade back, because the QRs were made then. And as per our procedures, the QRs can't be changed once the whole story, goes into production and, trials and all that. So are we technology conscious? I'm afraid not. Do we have a plan for technology induction into our system? I don't see it either in the budget. I don't see it even in the press information bureau output, on the defense at the end of the year.
Right.
I don't see mention of quantum. I don't see AI. I don't see cloud computing. I don't see many things, which, it is just 2, 3 I have said. What about energy? What about battlefield energy? We've discussed
Yes.
about it. What about robotics and unmanned systems? I think we need to have a holistic review. I go with Air Marshal Chaudhary and Mr. J.D. Patil. If we continue in this
Yes.
divergent manner away from China,
Yes.
sooner than later we will be in trouble.
Right.
Mark my word, we will be in trouble,
We will be in
right?
trouble if we are
And
not already in trouble, General Shankar. And you know, in the past it's been said that India had the choice. We've always faced a two-front security situation for more than half a century now. India had the choice of preparing for China, the major threat that would handle the minor threat, Pakistan. But instead, we seem to have focused on the minor threat, Pakistan, and were surprised by the major threat. Now, what you've mentioned, General Shankar, is absolutely spot on. We need a complete overhaul of our architecture and possibly even an increase in the defense budget. Mr. Patil, you've been part of India's defense in military industrial complex for decades. All of our acquisitions have been incremental. They have been, to use the expression, like drip irrigation. You have a K9 Vajra that's inducted more than almost a decade ago, and then you have the repeat order coming 10 years later. It's moving at such a slow pace, and like General Shankar mentioned, this is technology that's 10, 15 years old. How do we capture new technology to ensure that we are at a decent pace right behind China, if not maybe on par with China?
In fact, you said it, Sandeep, extremely well. This drip irrigation part is a reality. Let me give yet another example. Galwan happened in 2020. The first concept of the light tank happened in 2020. We have a system which is in trial, but we seem to be engaged in doing trials and trials and trials rather than going ahead and acquiring when we know that the enemy already has a system. Now, fact is, our systems can be superior, and in terms of performance, what has been put in. But at the same time, what is wanted is the speed at which we need to be taking them to conclusion and getting it into the industrial ecosystem. Same is the case with Vajra that you talked about. One change, I must tell you that when
Yes.
you are acquiring from overseas, it is essentially same old technology you keep buying. One good part, whenever
Yes.
it goes to an Indian ecosystem, is we are able to, at the last moment, bring in certain amount of technological updates.
Yes.
And that is one fundamental change which I believe this government has truly brought in, that 90% of our future acquisition today sits in the indigenous basket.
Right.
And to that extent, it's not just the extra capability and the technological obsolescence addressing is to that extent happening. It's also the life cycle related dependence now is moving inwards rather than outwards. And that is a big strategic advantage. One very fundamental part that we certainly need to be concentrating on is how do we address that perfect autonomy in
Right.
terms of our strategic aims and targets. And towards that, we cannot be importing the basic chip or for that matter, the electronics.
Yes.
The day we start doing it within the country, we can always be, reticent till that date that we
Yes.
can import and we can do things here. And just by software, we can deal with things. It's the hardware and software both
Yes.
need to be fully trusted, and only then we enjoy the strategic autonomy. And towards that, obviously, much more needs to be done. Currently, we seem to be focused on the chip side in pure
Yes.
manufacturing or packaging. Pure manufacturing and packaging won't take us there.
Right.
We need the fundamental design capabilities, and that is essentially where the government needs to be moving. Not a direct hard defense, but
Yes.
hard defense cannot happen without these softer capabilities.
Absolutely. Civil military fusion is possibly the order of the day. But Air Marshal Chaudhary, what are the kind of structures that we would need to execute this? Whether you look at civil military fusion or put out a technology, a defense technology roadmap, and then set deadlines to capture that technology, to induct it, to field it very rapidly, like the Chinese seem to be doing. Do you see the need for new structures, or how would you energize the existing ones, say the DRDO, for instance?
Sandeep, before I answer this part of the question, I sadly sort of want to bring this fact out that we are a nation that is not fully woke on issues of national security.
Right.
National security has been sort of the concern of only a few. And unlike most nations where rest of the nation gets involved in it, unfortunately, the mass younger generation which we talk about, which is supposed to be our strength, are not really so aware on the challenges of our national security, I'm
Right.
afraid. They're looking at it from an entirely different perspective. So that is one aspect. On the issue of on aspects of air power, I want to bring out one quick fact before I answer your question. Look at the way China has leveraged its air power. In the current narrative where they're saying that unmanned platforms will replace manned platforms and air forces are redundant.
Right.
The fact of it is every nation is investing in high-tech air power. The fact of it is that China has systematically upgraded its air power from a legacy number-intensive one to a qualitative and a capable one, which way back in 2016, the US Chief of Air Staff General Mark Walsh had said that by 2025, the Chinese Air Force will be as big, if not bigger,
Yes.
than the US Air Force. And it is rapidly heading there. And look at the kind of platforms they're going to showcase. And the real tragedy is, while we are still struggling with 114 of the MFRA, we are caught in a trap where we will not be able to bring out even our fifth technology aircraft before the sixth generation fighters are already in our neighborhood. China will most certainly field it, Pakistan will possibly get it, and you're looking at now Bangladesh seeking fifth generation fighters.
Right.
So we are in serious, serious trouble. This next major point I want to bring out is where we have to differentiate with the rest of the defense industry when it comes to the aviation, military aviation industry.
Yes.
Is one fact that Atmanirbharta for us, for India, is truly a much needed but a long-term strategy. It will not deliver niche outcomes and products in the near short-term future, where the gaps are rapidly increasing to a point where we are going to be outnumbered and outclassed by neighboring air forces. So we have to rely on foreign investment for niche technologies. We have to rely on strategic partnerships with nations. We cannot be caught anymore in a trap of the US and USSR or the US and Russia binary.
Yes.
We have to probably expand our options so that we don't get cornered into a situation where we are arm twisted to our strategic disadvantage in the future. So the point I'm trying to make is the only way to do it is you have to do a multi-pronged structure. Realize what are the critical short-term needs in the near future over the next 10 years. Buy them. Buy them now when they are still cheaper than it will be with every passing year. Second is invest much, much more in the private sector. They have to be brought on into a competitive mode and just what should I say, doing a sort of interior decoration change on HAL and DRDO will not fast track outcomes.
Before I get to that point about the news, structures, Marshal Chaudhary, very important points there about getting the private sector in on a big way. The defense production, of course, in 2024 surged by about 16%. It's 1.2.6 lakh crore is the output this year. A majority of it came from the public sector. The private sector makes up for about a fourth of India's defense output. Mr. Patil, since you're like literally the titan of the private sector defense industry in India, what is it that the government really needs to do to bring the private sector on board and create that level playing field? We've been discussing it for years and it's now been happening now in the last couple of years. What more needs to be done? This point that Air Marshal Chaudhary mentioned, that to get the private sector in on a major way, to some extent that's already been realized with the C295 aircraft production line in Gujarat. Does that need to be accelerated, and how should the government go about it?
Sandeep, at the outset, let me correct the percentage that you talked about.
Yes.
Last 7 years, we are stuck at 20%. It is 25 is the target that the government
Right,
gives.
which is not achieved, yes.
We are not yet there. So today, if we take at the indigenous part of the output, it's exactly 20% which is in the private sector, 80% stays with the public.
Yes.
And this actually stems from the fact that all along, till very recent years, most of our acquisition used to be necessarily on a nomination basis.
Yes.
Current government, obviously, right in 2014, and the previous government from 2011 has multiple times asserted in public nomination will be stopped. The nomination does not stop. 80% of the contracts signed during last literally 2 years, 2.5 years, is actually on a nomination basis. So
Right.
this is basic part of the, call it the system. Now the system ensures that the contracts necessarily go to public,
Yes.
and obviously then the private sector is not even allowed to compete.
Right.
So on one side, we know that efficiency matters, speed matters.
Yes.
Now, both, obviously, unless there is competition, and competition is good because when in 1992, 91, 92, the liberalization came in, all of us in industry were pitted against the global giants,
Yes.
no exceptions, and each one of us emerged stronger.
Yes.
And this strength that we acquired out of competing against the global giants actually came in extremely handy to building the India that we talk of today, especially for organizations like Larsen Toubro we keep talking of. We truly became much, much better when we started competing globally.
Yes.
Domestic competition is good up to a point, but not good enough. And
Right,
that's
not good
essentially-
enough. Yes, General Shankar, this point that Mr. Patil made about, I was reminded of the fighter jet that has two engines, and one engine seems to be firing on full. That's the public sector. The second engine is possibly not switched on to its full potential. The private sector defense, which is yet to even hit that 25% target. What do you think the government really needs to do to energize this, bring the private sector on board in a far bigger way than is being done right now?
We've spoken a lot about the government trying to do everything,
Yes.
and that the private sector as the panacea to all ills. But I have a slightly different view on this because the private sector simply doesn't invest. It's
Right.
nice to say that the private sector will come up and it should be given more than 25%, 30% all. It doesn't invest. It doesn't invest into R&D, right? It expects the R&D and the thing to come from DRDO and things like that. If the private sector is prepared to invest into R&D, you'll
Right.
get it out. Just like the government is not prepared to spend more than 2% of your GDP in entire defense sector,
Yes.
the private sector is also looking for short-term gains. They just want contracts on the fly.
Right.
So I think there is a larger problem with the defense sector as a whole, which you need to have a macro look. I think let me put it across this way. You need to be very clear what your threat is today,
Right.
and what your threat is going to come up tomorrow. And your acquisitions and your, everything, investment and everything has to be aligned with that threat.
Yes.
And that threat, to a large extent, is being now set
Right.
at fast pace by countries like China and Pakistan.
Yes.
So are you up to speed? No, once you do that, you should be very clear what are the technologies you need, what are the platforms you need. Like what Air Marshal Chaudhary said earlier, those which you need in the short run,
Yes.
you go in for strategic partnerships, you create structures for that and induct them at the earliest,
Right.
right? Those other things, you identify technologies and invest in technologies and simultaneously start developing the platforms on a wider scale through the private and public sectors. I mean, in short, you need a whole relook at this entire thing. Unless we do that, I'm afraid we are going to be out of the race.
We're going to be out of the race, and that has catastrophic implications for national security, General Shankar. But, I'm going to ask Air Marshal Chaudhary about the year ahead. We have come to the end of the year 2024. We've seen a number of achievements from the Defense Ministry. Of course, the biggest one the Defense Ministry says is the border agreement with China on the LAC, the disengagement at two spots, which has taken some heat off the border, and two potential flashpoints have been diffused. And there are other achievements like the positive indigenization list and defense production, and of course the induction of strategic platforms like the Arihant class submarines. The INS Arihant was commissioned. But Air Marshal Chaudhary, looking at the year ahead, 2025, what are the two things that you would like to see happen in 2025 that will actually enhance India's security potential, its security posture in the year 2025? Just the two things, whether it's an item of reform or it's a urgent hardware purchase or a partnership.
First and foremost, I would like to see is a much greater realization, understanding and articulation from the strategic community and the military community and the keepers of India's national security towards air power.
Right.
In the recent years, we have seemed to have ceded, forgotten about air power, and we talk only about maritime domain and continental domain,
Yes.
space and cyber. India is the only nation which just doesn't talk about air power. I'm amazed.
Yes.
So that is our biggest kicker, that unless and until we change our outlook in our military, in our strategic community, what air power brings to the table.
Yes.
Obviously, it brings to the table a lot, because every service is now seeking its own air power
Yes.
in a budget-strapped nation, instead
Right.
of allowing core competencies to expand
Yes.
and develop. Everyone seeks so there we need a comprehensive strategy and an outlook. And I would say, in fact, I've written about it, that it's time that there are so many issues which are, it's like holding sand with two hands with sand flowing through your fingers.
Yes.
We need a strategy of strategies which looks at things differently.
Right.
Separate things separately. A strategy of strategies. Something which we, unfortunately, in India don't do very well. That is strategy. But we need something which will, A, look at our pure military threat.
Right.
B, look at the gaps in the military threat which
Yes.
can be produced or developed in India in the short term, and separated it in investments in the future
Right.
for long-term needs. So the first need, I would say, is the need to understand that the air power is much potent, much needed, and a very, very future relevant instrument of national security, which isn't going anywhere, despite all claims and short-term claims on seeing wars which are still in progress.
Yes.
And the second thing I need is a much more comprehensive outlook where all the players of national security need to come on board.
Yes.
Because national security is no longer a responsibility of the military anymore.
Right. Of course.
It needs a comprehensive all-of-nation approach.
Yes, a
So
comprehensive
that's why my second
all-of-nation approach. That's a very important point there. General Ravi Shankar, what are your two items on your top of your wish list going to be for India in 2025?
If I say the first wish list is that the defense budget has to increase to at least by a factor of 50%. That's the minimum. Why I say factor of 50% and not more is you can put the budget on, but you need to have the capacity to spend also, which we don't have. So this is going to take a lot of time. The second thing which we have to put on table is investment into technology at great pace. I would like a lot of technology hubs to come in. I would like technology to be taken beyond DRDOs, involve IITs, involve any other scientific institutions, and start looking at applied technology,
Yes.
not technology for the sake of its technology. Okay, having said this, let me, in this entire discussion, we've sounded as if we're going to be completely out of the race X, Y, Z, and that China will overhaul us completely. I think that will convey a wrong impression to all our viewers. Right? We are not out of the equation with China at all. Let me be very clear. If we were out of the equation with China militarily, they wouldn't have gone back on the LAC.
Right, of course.
As simple as that.
Right, that's
They have
hopeful,
got-
General
Right.
Shankar. I mean, that's
Yeah,
a lot of hope for us. Yes.
one more point I'd like to put across is that, if you analyze China, China is building its capability to face four fronts.
Yes.
First is the Korean front, second is the Taiwan front, third is the South China Sea front, and fourth is the Indian front. That's
Right.
their stated position,
Yes.
incidentally. And as of today, as we are speaking, there's a huge relocation and restructuring of the American forces in the Western Pacific. And
Yes.
China is reacting to that.
Right.
It's in a
Absolutely.
reactionary mode, right? So think we have still a window of opportunity in this. If we get our act together, by the time China turns back towards us, we
Yes.
should be ready.
We should be ready, Mr. Patil. What are your two items on your wish list for 2025 for that window of opportunity that General Shankar mentioned?
Sandeep, we are in unprecedented times, and I keep saying it again and again for a reason. We bought peace, but we know China can always bring back surprises. They did so
Yes.
multiple times in the past. So future can't be greatly different. And if we live in the kind of a paradise that they will not really want to get active, now
Yes.
that the pullback has happened, we need to be preparing for that. Now towards, we have again, after 5 years, a first major opportunity to completely reform our acquisition process.
Right.
That's something which is due in the form of the DAP 25, and that's essentially where we have an opportunity to set lots of things right. Besides, of course, as Colonel Shankar very rightly General Shankar very rightly said, in terms of enhancing the budget, and that's where a lot can be done. We need to find how to do things fast,
Right.
how to trust the industry at large, and not only a matter of public private as separate, but public private and public and private together, all of it combined, because that's essentially where we can churn out things far faster, and obviously a perfect level playing field to make sure that we all actually deliver what is needed, and in the right strategic direction try and do things here as much to gain that strategic autonomy.
Absolutely. Strategic autonomy, which is the need of the hour, and that's literally written into India's defense and strategic DNA as well. And that's one of the reasons why we're talking about all of these developments on our northern frontiers that have enormous implications for India. But thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us.